My name is Emma Lou.
And where are you from?
I am from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm new to New York. I just got here yesterday. I'm from the South, and that's interesting in itself. I find that there are a lot of heteronormative relationships, or that seems to be what people aim for. Not a lot of people, but some. And so I would like to talk about like femininity and masculinity and what it means, and how there is no specific, qualification or look for what that is, and to allow people to be themselves.
Also, there's two new girls. Hey, Kristen.
Hi, G.
Hey, Jay.
Hi.
So, define the term gender roles in your own way.
So gender roles can be what you're assigned at birth, right? Your gender assigned at birth, but I think a better term is gender expression. And I think it's a composite of all the ways you want to represent yourself to the world. So it could be your clothes, it could be your mannerisms, it could be the way you style your hair, it could be the language you use and the way you walk. All those things together make your gender role.
Gender roles. I don't know. I don't know how to define that term. I don't really think about it. So gender roles, what a man does, what a woman does, I guess.
Gender roles I would define as, the socially constructed expectations, norms, mores that society places on the performance of gender.
Do you have any issues with gender roles?
I don't like them. I think I have a problem with that. Maybe you could blame it on my psychology of women class, and I walked out as a feminist, but I have a problem with gender roles because gender roles is like, it tells a woman what a woman's supposed to be or what a man's supposed to be, and as soon as a woman step out what is the norm, what a woman's supposed to be, all of a sudden she's a butch, she's a bitch, she's this and she that.
You can't escape. Like, you can hate on gender roles, but you can't really escape them because you're molded by them, like in this really fundamental way. And you can start to think critically about them and how to build like a more positive version of it, but you can't completely just escape them or abandon them. They're like etched on your body.
Sure. I think in the simplest way, I think your gender and the way you identify yourself and your gender role is shaped by your environment and your exposure and the privilege that comes from that.
I think that there is associated privilege with identifications in the queer community. I work in corporate America, literally straight collar. It's a fashion industry, so there's a little bit of a leniency there, but for the most part, it's a very black and white environment, and I can say 100% that I would not have the opportunities that I would have if my presence was not one of a feminine woman.
I think privilege is a very strong word to say someone has more power than me. It's like I'm giving my power away, and I'm not willing to do that.
Well, Alyssa says she doesn't feel safe dressed in the way she does in other parts of the world. How you feel about that?
There's definitely privilege in it, because if I was in South Africa right now, I couldn't say that I would be presenting myself the same way, because it's a safety issue, you know what I mean? Life and death.
Yeah, that's true. Being American is easy. At the end of the day, being American is easy. We could talk about poverty in America, but we got running water. And we could talk about gender roles and privilege and homophobia in America, but it's not South Africa, it's not Nigeria. And I went abroad for a while. I was in Egypt for like a year. I was in Ghana for a semester, and in Egypt I didn't even play. I was wrapping my hair, was wearing skirts, I wasn't fucking around with nobody, and still got spat on, but not because I was gay, but because I was black. So I'm just not even hip enough or well-read enough to really speak on what's going on. But I think in order to make any change, it has to be a conversation over the ocean, like that way, and down south, like South America, Jamaica, the Caribbean, just like, how do we talk to each other and make sure that we support each other as women?
Of course, there are going to be different pros and cons or privileges that one has over the other because of how, you know, our society is. I mean, like, masculinity is associated with more power and, you know, stuff like that. I'm not saying that that's correct, but I'm saying that it is associated with it, with, you know, most people's like common understanding, and I'm not saying that's right.
Masculinity is used inversely with the word dominant within our community. Like when people say you're the dom, like what is that? Like every time someone says that to me about my relationship, I correct them and say, no, we're co-dominant, if you want to put it that way. Me and my girlfriend, she's, you know, she's femme, but I guess, like, you know what I mean? And so am I. Like, really, where are the lines?
Well, it's the difference between gender expression, right, and your sexual orientation. So I may be, like, I consider myself a high femme, but that doesn't mean that, like, in the bedroom, I'm passive, you know? It doesn't.
Cheers.
Yeah. So when we make these, when we are making judgments about a person's behavior and sexual orientation based on the way they dress, that's where the problem begins. And when we try to police people to these binaries, right, to this either masculine or feminine, and there's no in between, that's where the problem is.
So there are AGs, studs, butches, and doms. And then there's masculine of center. Some people think these all mean the same thing. What's your opinion?
That's gender roles, because dominance is not, doesn't have a sex to it. Dominant is just a quality. It's just an act.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they mean the same thing, because everyone, you know, negotiates with their gender in a different way, and I think society, and especially in the queer community too, you know, everyone projects whatever they think the meaning is onto other people.
I really like the term masculine of center because it creates more of a spectrum of masculinity rather than these hard labels. But I definitely do think that a lot of those labels come out of class and race marginalization. And I think we talked about this during our conversation about emulating forms of masculinity within our community. And I definitely have observed that within communities of color, we tend to emulate a certain form of masculinity, which is, I mean, this could be a whole thesis about the way that we emulate masculinity and the way that it's created as a result of being systematically marginalized in our community.
I think the terms are just regional. Like in DC, we say dom, but when I moved to New York, everybody said AG. I think like in Toronto, it's like something called Stud Magazine. I think that's the term they use down south too, even though DC is the south sort of. Masculine of center, I think is just like brand new. I'm waiting on like the analysis or the paper to come out to really explain what masculine of center is. And for me, like, or even boy, right, B-O-I, which is cool. They're all cool. I think fashion determines whether or not someone is a boy or is masculine center a little bit too much. Because I would say if I wanted to give some of my personality traits to being masculine, then I would give myself masculine of center. But since I wear dresses and since I'm definitely like not a dom in any way, I don't get to be included in that conversation.
I remember coming up, I used to see, I'm from Dallas, and so I would see like the older lesbians there, and I'm like, I don't want to do that.
No, that's so real. Like they really tried to, like they really were at a time where they didn't have the privilege to like have the progression and queer culture that we have in the LGBT community and the unity, especially with women of color. And you can see it because they look like these men. They look like these men, and they're not trans. They're women, but you can tell from like their age and what even the stuff that they wear. They're still wearing FUBU. Like, I'm not hating like FUBU. They're a great brand. They did a really good job.
In New Orleans, where I was from, being gay was very heteronormative in the ideas of femme women paired back with masculine women. And I think growing up in that environment, that had a lot to do with the fact that I'm ridiculously attracted to masculine women.
You know, there's really no way to avoid heterosexuality and some of the patterns that show up because we were all raised and grew up in heteronormative environments, whether you grew up with a single parent or two parents, or even, you know, I guess it's different if you grew up with two gay parents, but I had a mommy and I had a daddy, so that's how it works for me.
I think it really comes down to awareness and having agency over that, right? And knowing, hey, I could be in this non-heteronormative relationship, but I feel most comfortable with this type of relationship. And looking at my relationship with Crystal, people can look at us and be like, oh, that's another butch femme. But I think our relationship's more nuanced than that. I think our power dynamic is more nuanced than that. It's not as skewed as it can be with butch femme relationships. And I think people's sexual practices can differ a lot from the way that people assume you to be because you're femme and you're butch. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can break the binary.
It's interesting because I went to the Brooklyn Museum yesterday, and there was this exhibit that was talking about masculine, they were talking about men, and their identity within society, whether it be Black society or white society or society as a whole. And this guy used this one term called regulatory Blackness. And he said, why is it that if you gear outside of these standards of Blackness, then you're no longer considered Black? And although I heard him, I immediately applied that to regulatory queerness. And I definitely relate to Yvette in that sense, because I think traditionally my relationships wouldn't be queer enough.
I mean, it all goes back to the same thing. Like, we try to step away from heterosexual society, white middle-class society defining us as queers, but then yet you go into queer society and we're sitting here pointing fingers like, oh, she's not gay enough. Oh, they're in a heterosexual relationship because like she likes to strap up and she always takes it. Like, no, everyone in their relationship is going to define things the way that they want to define things.
It's like I feel as though for us to say, let us love who we want to love, how in our community can we say, but don't do that? Mm-hmm. Like, S for S.
But my question is, I think it's only, and I hate to say this, but I think it's only in the colored community, and I always say like, I call them our sisters on the other side of the rainbow, which is more like, you know, the white women, no offense. When I go to Henrietta Hudson, you see everything. You see femme on femme, you see dom on dom, and they just loving each other, and that's it. But I just think, and it's very sad that the Black people.
But isn't it a manifestation of privilege, though, right? Privilege to be exposed to the ideas of queer, privilege to go to college and be around people with different ideas.
Privilege in the examples of masculinity that you have to build off of. As a masculine identified woman, you look to your community usually of men, in order to build your masculinity. Mm-hmm. And I think for people of color, that means you have a lot of bad examples. And I know that for me personally, I learned how to be masculine from my father. And I have a lot of the same mannerisms that my father does. And while we can talk about like gender roles being really insidious or like doing a lot of bad things, it's also for me about how I feel powerful. How do I feel powerful moving in the world? And it's not femininely, it's masculinely. And there's no like clear way to define what masculine is, but you know it when you see it. And that's the way that I like to be perceived. And I think for like a lot of masculine people of color, the way to be perceived as masculine is to act the way the men that they see around them act. And so I think it's really destructive. It can be, but I think there are like bigger issues there about like race and privilege and like the kinds of masculinity that you see in like the Latino and Black community that we learn to build ourselves off of.
Can I just ask then, are you saying that masculinity is like a physical embodiment?
Yeah.
But can it be, because in terms of when you're talking about dominance, like how do you describe these things? Aren't these some things concepts and things to do with the mind? So to say that you have to look at someone physically to actually behave like them, and that's how you get your understanding of masculinity.
Or it's about perception as well.
Perception, because I think that we build ourselves as much inside our heads as we do. Like I exist in the space between me and the next person. Like I create myself there as much as I do in my head. So I can think that I'm one thing as much as I want, but unless I manifest it, and I manifest it through my clothing, through my body, through the way I like hold my chest, through the way I walk, all of that is a physical manifestation of me. And I don't exist without that physical manifestation. I think I don't exist without that physical manifestation.
I'm Allison Hamilton. Everyone calls me Al. I'm an artist, primarily also a doctoral student. I work with digital photography, film. Also, I do a little bit of costume installation as well. The title comes from Marlon Riggs and his amazing, amazing film, Black Is, Black Ain't, which is one of my favorites. He's probably my favorite filmmaker. And I really admire the legacy of work that he's left us. And so, you know, the thing about Marlon Riggs that I love is that he was really fearless in his commitment to live outside of the box, I think, or to talk about a lot of things that aren't always talked about in Black communities. And so when I had the idea for this series, you know, I had to name it Black Ain't because it's basically, you know, talking about all the things that, you know, okay, Black people don't do that, you know. The title of this installation is Embodiment. So it's basically the ways that Black people can express themselves through the body in ways that kind of push back against a normative Black existence or a normative Black aesthetic. So, you know, queer sexuality and queer bodily expression is definitely a theme that looms large: dress, posture, body modification. Some that are self-portraits of me after a surgery that I underwent. And it's just kind of a story about healing and how, you know, healing isn't always something that is talked about in depth, or the process of an unhealthy body transitioning into a healthy one is not something that's always like shown. The most recent photos that are in this show are of a good friend of mine, Zara, who identifies as genderqueer and recently underwent top surgery. And so I did some photos with them at their pre-op, like right before the surgery. So those are kind of the more, I guess, prominent wall, that one. This is kind of like a queer embodiment story. Queer dress, masculinities and femininities, and just the idea that masculinity and femininity isn't necessarily located with one particular gender, and that it can be played with through dress. So that's what this back wall is about. So I hope we're gonna like cut these and like splice them, because okay.
This is Our News, brought to you by Elixir. Big news out of Maryland this month. Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley signed the state's marriage equality bill into law, making Maryland the 8th state, plus the District of Columbia, to enact marriage for same-sex couples.
The bill is done.
I'm proud of my state of Maryland.
I'm proud that Maryland's one of the earliest states in the country to do this.
It gives us an opportunity to, again, create our version of the American dream.
Opponents are prepared to collect the signatures needed to put the measure on the ballot. But contrary to the media's one-sided depiction of the Black community, 36% of African Americans in Prince George's County said they believe marriage for gay and lesbian couples should be legal. 36%. This is no small minority. Also, a recent report shows that 1/3 of Black Protestants surveyed nationally are supportive of the freedom to marry. Members of Black churches make up 18% of Maryland's population, more than double the numbers seen on a national level, and more than 1 million voters in the state. In other news, Asante Cotman, a junior at Charles City High School in Virginia, says he was suspended for 3 days after refusing to take off a pair of high heels he was wearing. A pair of fierce high heels, I might add. Cotman told a local news station he was ordered to take off the shoes because they were disrupting the school. School principal Stephanie Crutchfield, who suspended Cotman, declined to comment, but District Superintendent Janet Crowley says they will investigate the situation. On a lighter note, Oscar nominee Viola Davis is in talks to star in the biopic of the groundbreaking politician Barbara Jordan. Davis is eyeing the role as well as possibly serving as a producing partner on the film. Barbara Jordan was the first African American to serve in the Texas Senate, the first Black woman elected to Congress from the South, and the first to deliver the keynote address at a national party convention. While she was never public about her orientation, Jordan's obituary mentioned her partner of 30 years, Nancy Earl. That's all the news we have for today, but you can visit elixir.com for daily LGBT news updates. Be sure to check out our Week in Review column, a weekly recap of the biggest news stories that affect our community. If there's a news story you'd like to see Elixir cover on The Peculiar Kind, email us at info@elixir.com. Again, that's info@elixir.com. Until next time.
I think I would love to have a Queer People of Color series cover a lot of perspectives from the immigrant community, because I think a lot of times growing up being like an Indian Jamaican woman and having two parents from Jamaica, homosexuality is always viewed as this Western import.
I asked while I was in the Philippines, I guess it was last year, like what queer women do for jobs, and the answer I got was like, be a policewoman or a security guard. So that can't be true, but I don't know, that's the stereotype that's there still, I guess.